Vidhammer Fantasy.
Welcome back to Vidhammer. I'm Spudlow, and in this video I'll be covering a fun home game match that we put together between the Lizardmen and the Demons of Chaos at 9,000 points, all painted. This was our first time playing a game this size, and we quickly realized how much time it was going to take to play this kind of a battle, especially when you have two people trying to make decisions for each side. In this match, Joseph and I run things for the Lizardmen, while Patrick and Alex play their hand at the Demons of Chaos. Here's how it works out in our first Uber battle.
When we first started to set up for this battle, we rolled for a random scenario and got Battle for the Pass, which we figured would take 3 turns before we could get into combat, and the resultant traffic jam would be catastrophic. So we re-rolled and got Blood and Glory. After some quick calculations, we realized that at this point level, if either side lost a unit with their BSB, the game would end. Realizing that meeting engagement would have its own set of problems, we opted for Battle Line so that we could actually enjoy the fruits of our efforts. Here's a quick rundown of our list. Our first character is Lord Mazdamundi, who rides the Ancient Stegodon's Lock. He also counts as a caster with the Lore of Light that ends up with Speed of Light, Light of Battle, Net of Amantok, and Barona's Time Warp. We have a second Slan who's our Army General and BSB with the Cupped Hands of the Old Ones, a Healing Potion, Soul of Stone, Becalming Cogitation, and is a Lore Master with the Lore of Shadow. And a third Slan with the Cube of Darkness, Becalming Cogitation, and a Lore Master with the Lore of Life. Our last caster is a Skink Priest on an Ancient Stegodon with the Engine of the Gods, a Dispel Scroll, the Relic Sword, the Seed of Rebirth, and is a Lore of Heavens caster that gets Curse of the Midnight Wind, Comet of Cassandora, and Chain Lightning. For our other characters, we have a Saurus Old Blood on a Carnosaur with the Talisman of Endurance, a Saurus Old Blood on foot with Fencer's Blades, a Talisman of Preservation, and the Cursed Charm of Tepak. Then there's 2 Scar Veterans, one on foot and one riding a Cold One. As our units, we have 45 Temple Guard with flaming attacks, 2 units of 6 Saurus Warriors with hand weapons and shields, 50 Saurus Warriors with spears and shields, 35 more Saurus Warriors with hand weapon and shield, 2 units of 10 Chameleon Skinks, 21 Cold One Cavalry, 18 Croxagores, 2 units of 3 Salamanders with 9 Handlers, a unit of 4 Pterodon Riders, and a Stegodon. Quite the mass of troops, but they have a lot to bring to bear on us, starting with Kairos Fateweaver as their general. He gets all the Tzeentch spells, and he gets to choose 8 more spells, which they take as Flesh to Stone, Earth Blood, Throne of Vines, Enchanted Blades, Flaming Sword of Ruin, Occam's Mindrazor, Pit of Shades, and the Withering. Then there's the Great Unclean One with Nurgle's Rot and the Bale Sword, who takes the Lore of Nurgle with Pit of Slime, Rancid Visitation, Shriveling Pox, and Plague Wind. A Bloodthirster with Awesome Strength and the Axe of Khorne, and a Demon Prince with Immortal Fury, Soul Hunger, and Unnatural Swiftness. Then there's Skulltaker and the Mask, followed by a Herald of Slaanesh and 2 Heralds of Khorne, one of which is the BSB, with the great standard of Sundering. Finally, their units consist of 9 Blood Crushers of Khorne with the Skull Totem, 3 units of 6 Fleshhounds of Khorne, 5 Beasts of Nurgle, 7 Fiends of Slaanesh, 3 units of 6 Flamers of Tzeentch, 60 Pink Horrors with the Icon of Sorcery, and this is the unit that actually knows the spells Flickering Fire of Tzeentch, Gift of Chaos, Bolt of Change, and Tzeentch's Firestorm. There's also 60 Bloodletters of Khorne with the Icon of Endless War, 50 Demonettes of Slaanesh with the Siren Standard, 50 Plague Bearers of Nurgle, and 7 Nurglings. All in all, a lot of nicely painted models, and with them all trade up, we just have to play the game. They win the roll for board edge and choose the right side to set up on. There didn't seem to be much of an advantage to either side, and their models were on that side already, so it was probably out of convenience more than anything. They start off with a unit of flamers in the central house. Then I stare at the board for quite a while before finally putting the small unit of 35 Saurus warriors behind the forest on our side, figuring this was the most expendable unit for us, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if the forest jacks them up, and it leaves the prime positions open for the good stuff. They follow with a second flamer unit behind their marsh, so I put down a unit of 50 Saurus behind the upper house, thinking that they'll just move into it on the first turn and pop out behind it on the second. This unit won't cover very much ground, but I'm figuring there's going to be a lot of small maneuvers for the first couple of turns. They put down their last unit of flamers, so I go for one of the units of 60 Saurus near the top. I'm leaving enough room to put support units in between the infantry blocks, but I'm trying to delay putting those down as long as possible. The strategy isn't doing me a lot of good as they put down 7 fiends, so none of their real strengths are out. At this point, we make some modifications since we realize that we should only have 24 inches between our minimum distances, so we move up some of our units. I go for the salamanders behind the pyramid thing in the center, thinking it's good to have them where they can go up or down depending on how things start out. They follow with 6 fleshhounds, and it becomes apparent that most of our line will be down before any of their infantry blocks are on the table. I can only stall with support units at this point, so I throw down the regular stegodon between the bigger Saurus units, and they put down more fleshhounds just below the swamp. I put the pterodons down behind the salamanders. With vanguard and flying, they'll be a versatile redirector if nothing else. Amazingly, they put down more fleshhounds, but above the swamp this time. I put my second chameleon unit next to the first, and they put down their beasts of Nurgle up top. As frustrating as the situation seems, having no idea where their big blocks are going yet, I realize that they've clogged up the front of their battle line on the upper half of our board. I pull my teammate aside and tell him what I'm thinking at this point. If we can put everything else we have up at the top, then we force them to deploy their big blocks behind all of that chaff so they have to wait till we get through it, or they can deploy at the bottom and run around the pyramid, but only a couple of units will be able to make it through that gap at once. Either way, we've got a great opportunity to kill off a bunch of their smaller units and grab some early points. I put down the last unit of Saurus warriors off of the top of the screen, but I place them far enough back from the line so that I can fit another unit in front of it later. It doesn't look too obvious since the other Saurus units are back a bit as well. They finally go for one of their infantry blocks as the Plaguebringers go down. They're angled towards the top, but there's some dogs in the way, so it looks okay. I throw down the ancient stegodon with the engine of the gods, and they go for their bloodletters beside their Plaguebringers. The ancient stegodon was also a character choice, so I pick it up and have to make 2 placements to catch up. So I put down the temple guard behind the smaller Saurus unit, and I put the Cold One riders in the last remaining gap. This took them a bit by surprise as they were expecting me to put the temple guard up front, but I like to keep them guessing. The big block of pink horrors comes out for their side, and for my last surprise I put the Croxagores at the top, in front of the off-screen Saurus. This makes the lower half of our line look like a very juicy target, so the Demonettes of Slaanesh come down on the bottom as well. We're onto our characters, so I start with the Shadow Slan that goes with the Temple Guard, and the Life Slan that goes with the upper blue Saurus. The Skink on the Ancient Stegodon with the Engine of the Gods goes back between the Saurus units. Mazdamundi goes above the Cold Ones, while the Carnosaur sits above the house. The Cold Ones pick up a Scar Veteran, and the upper blue Saurus get the second Scar Veteran and the other Saurus Old Blood. They finish off their placements with the Blood Crushers that also go towards the bottom of their line, though this seems a bit of a surprise to me. They'll have to navigate the terrain, but it will be worth it if they can get there. Then their characters with the Herald of Slaanesh that goes with the Demonettes, the Herald of Khorne BSB and Skulltaker that go with the Blood Letters, while the other Herald of Khorne goes with the Blood Crushers. Kairos hides behind the central building, the Mask and the Bloodthirster go up top, the Demon Prince goes in front of the building, and the Great Unclean One goes behind the Beasts of Nurgle. With normal deployment finished, they put their Nurglings down 12 inches away from the Kroxigors at the top, while we put one unit of Skinks 12 inches behind the Mask, and the other 12 inches behind the Fiends. I angle the camera up to get everything into view as the Pterodon riders make their vanguard move. With everything finally ready to go, we both roll 1s for the first turn roll, but we get the +1 and start off rolling for the forest, with ours being a wildwood and theirs being a blood forest. After a bunch of debate, we start moving things forward, with the central blue Saurus going into the building and the Pterodon riders getting right up to the Flamers and Hounds to take either the charge or the shooting from the Flamers. Our first magic phase ends up 6 versus 6, and with a silly amount of spells to choose from, and knowing that they've got a lot of magic power themselves, we go for our remains in play effects to hopefully make them have to burn their power dice to get rid of them. We use 3 dice for Enfeebling Foe on the Plaguebringers, and we get an extra die from the Slan's ability. They let the spell go and it lowers their strength by 2. We use our last 3 plus 1 for the Withering and get an Irresistible Force, but we're not within line of sight, so we can't use the Cupped Hands. We have a lengthy debate on line of sight and how much needs to be visible before eventually we move on and the Plaguebearers lose 2 toughness before we roll for our miscast. They use Kairos' ability to re-roll a single die on a turn to make us re-roll one of the dice to try to get us to roll the Dimensional Cascade, but we don't. We lose 9 Temple Guard instead. For shooting, the upper Skinks put 2 wounds on the Mask that fails both 3+ ward saves and decides to be a spectator for the rest of this battle. The lower Skinks put 4 wounds on the Fiends, and the Pterodons hit the Fleshhounds for a single wound. Finally, the Stegodon fires its bolt thrower at the Flamers, but misses to end our first round. It's over to the Demons for the inevitable charge of the Pterodons, who should have had a stand and shoot reaction since they're quick to fire, but I forget about it. It's not a huge mistake in this video, but wait till you see the next one. Other units move up, the upper Flamers head into the house, the lower ones come out of the house, and some of the characters take up camp behind the pyramid. Magic ends up 11 versus 7. They use their first 4 for Throne of Vines on Kairos, and we let it go through since there's a lot worse in their other spells. They use their next 4 to cast Tzeentch's Firestorm on the Cold Ones. They get a high casting cost, and even at Strength 5, the Cold Ones will get a 4+ armor save, so we let this one go. It takes out 3 Cold Ones and makes a single pink horror unit, which they park in front of the cav. Next, they use 2 dice for Glean Magic, and since they only have a single die left, we hold 2 back and use 5 to dispel this one. They use their single die for Boon of Tzeentch, and we can't even stop it with 2 dice. So they get 2 dice back that they use for Enchanted Blades of Izan on the Flamers in the building to give them +1 to hit. On to shooting. The lower and Swamp Flamers don't have range on anything, but the Flamers in the building manage to take out 3 of the Blue Saurus. Then in combat, the Fleshhounds take out the Pterodon riders, but only overrun a few inches. On the second turn, our Cold Ones charge the single pink horror, and the Kroxigors charge the Nurglings. The single pink horror chooses to flee, and we can't redirect, so it gets run down as the Cold Ones stride into the middle. The rest of our units move forward, reform, and generally advance on the upper half while fleeing from the lower half. All but the lower Skinks, of course, because it just takes too much effort to walk over there. Magic ends up 8 versus 5, and we start out with 2 dice to dispel Throne of Vines from Kairos. We use our next 3 plus an extra to put up a Throne of Vines of our own. Then they attempt to dispel the Withering from the Plaguebearers, but fail. but they succeed at dispelling enfeebling foe. Finally, we use our last 3 dice plus 1 for Flesh to Stone on the Cold One Riders, but it gets dispelled with their scroll. In shooting, the upper skinks kill off a hound, and the Stegodon tries a flank shot but misses. The ancient Stegodon takes out 2 of the central hounds, then the salamanders fire at the plague bearers. The first 2 manage to misfire and end up eating 5 of the skinks, and the last one manages to kill off 8. Combat consists of the Kroxigors stomping on the Nurglings, then turning around, though I would soon come to regret the direction I choose to face them. Back over to the demons, the upper hounds charge the chameleon skinks, and we opt to flee, since we would most surely die in combat. And if we flee, we should make it off the board, so the flesh hounds would have to redirect into the Kroxigors, or take a failed charge, and then the Kroxigors would charge them. Unfortunately, the skinks only run 4 inches and actually get caught by the flesh hounds, who end up out of the Kroxigors' charge range. We do some late terrain rolls, and the lower frontalsaurus take 4 wounds from the woods. The lower fleshhounds charge the salamanders, and the beasts of Nurgle and Bloodthirster charge the flank of the cold ones. For normal moves, they only move up their lower units and the demon prince. In Magic, they get 8 power dice against 4 dispel dice. They use 4 dice for withering on the cold ones, which we dispel with the Cube of Darkness, hoping it will end the magic phase, but it doesn't come through. Next, they use 2 dice for Flaming Sword of Ruin on the Beasts of Nurgle to give them +1 to wound. It was a tough decision since we could effectively dispel this spell or the next one, which would probably be Boon of Tzeentch. We decided to let this one go and dispelled Boon of Tzeentch, and as the video memory maxed out, we moved into shooting, and the flamers in the building managed to take out 9 of the blue Saurus with spears. For on-camera shooting, the lower flamers take out 2 models from the lower Saurus. In combat, hidden behind the pyramid thingy, 2 flesh hounds die as they take out a salamander. The hounds win the combat, but the manders hold steady. In the other combat, we issue a challenge with our character so that the Bloodthirster will only be able to kill off a single model. Hopefully, we'll be able to stay steadfast a little longer, since there's no way we're going to win the combat. The Bloodthirster slaughters the Old Blood, then the Cold Ones only manage a single wound on the Toughness 5 beasts before they take out 2 Cold Ones. The Lizards lose the combat, but remain steadfast and pass their break test, thanks to a little cold-bloodedness. We try to reform amid defeat, but we need a 3, and our blood isn't quite that cold. The third turn starts out with several charges on our end. The small unit of Saurus charge the flank of the hounds behind the pyramid thingy. The Carnosaur and Central Blue Saurus charge the flank and rear of the Beasts of Nurgle. Mazdamundi charges the Demon Prince, and the upper Blue Saurus charge the flamers in the building. Everyone makes their distances, with the flamers taking out 3 Saurus with their stand and shoot. For our normal moves, we try to put the Engine of the Gods between the 2 upper combats so they could both get the benefit. Doesn't quite work out though. Other units move up and flee accordingly. Magic ends up 7 versus 4. We use the Eye of the Gods to try to damage the nearby units, but the range comes up short, as they throw a die to try to dispel Throne of Vines, but fail. Then we throw 4 dice plus 1 for Flesh to Stone on the Cold Ones, raising them to Toughness 8. We could have put this on the Saurus units in the center, but they seemed like an expendable asset compared to the Cold Ones. They use their last 3 dice to dispel the withering from the Plague Bearers, as we use our last 3 plus 1 for Mazdamundi to cast Barona's Time Warp on the Cold Ones with irresistible force, and he loses the spell in the backlash. As our only shooting in range, the Stegodon shoots for the flank of the hounds above the swamp, but misses. On to the combat phase, where we start with the building assault. The Saurus Old Blood issues a challenge, and puts 3 wounds on the Flamer Champion, but it saves 2 and lives to fight back with no effect. The remaining flamers take out 2 models, then the Scar Veteran causes 1 wound, and the remaining Saurus cause 3 more. The flamers are steadfast and don't take any wounds in crumbling, so the Saurus bounce back. In the big central combat, the Cold One champion issues a challenge this time, but gets cut down just as fast to the Strength 10 Bloodthirster. The remaining Cold Ones hit the Beasts of Nurgle for 4 wounds, taking 1 out. The Carnosaur and Rider hit for 2 more unsaved wounds, and the Saurus warriors only manage 1 that takes out another model. The Beasts of Nurgle hit the Saurus for 3 and fail to wound the Carnosaur. Then they stomp the Saurus but fail to wound. The Lizards win the combat by 4, with the Beasts of Nurgle passing their unstable roll, and the Bloodthirster rolls double 6s for its roll and dies without taking an actual wound. The Cold Ones reform to face the Beasts, and we move into the lower combat, where the Salamanders take out one of the Fleshhounds, the Hounds kill off a Saurus, and the Saurus do a single wound to the final Hound, who dies in combat resolution. So unfortunately, we don't get a reform to face the upcoming onslaught. In our final combat, the Stegodon gets 2 wounds in impact hits. The Demon Prince swings for Mazdamundi, but he saves the 4 wounds that are caused. Then Mazdamundi fails to wound. The Demon Prince loses the combat, but passes its unstable check. On the Demon's turn, after deliberation, they charge the Salamanders with their lower flamers. We choose to flee since the unit would surely die, and they redirect into Mazdamundi. Then the Unclean One charges the smaller Saurus warrior unit, and I think about it for a bit, but elect to hold on this. Then the Plaguebringers decide to charge them as well, and this time I elect to flee, hoping they would get out of dodge, but they only go a few inches. Next, the Central Fleshhounds charge the Stegodon, and finally the Bloodletters charge the Central Blue Saurus. The Flamers get enough to make the distance, the Unclean One fails along with the Plaguebringers. The Fleshhounds aren't able to complete their charge, so they pull in front of the Flamers, and finally, the Bloodletters fail their distance even with an extra die from their banner and stop just short of the swamp. In normal moves, the lower half of the board advances as the upper units jostle a bit. Magic ends up 6 versus 4. They use 2 dice for Boon of Tzeentch and get their 2 dice back again. Then they use all 6 dice for Pit of Shades on the Temple Guard, but we dispel it with our remaining scroll, since our general is in that unit and he stands a significant chance of getting sucked into the void. For shooting, both of the upper Flamer units shoot for the upper Blue Saurus for 2 wounds. Then on to combat. Mazdamundi gets challenged by the Demon Prince. Mazdamundi fails to wound, but he takes one from the Demon Prince. Then the Stegodon fails as well. Mazdamundi loses the combat, but is stubborn and passes his break test. On to the central combat, where the Cold Ones finally get their full number of attacks and manage 4 wounds between the Riders and the Mounts. Then the Carnosaur and Rider get 2 wounds. The Beasts of Nurgle and the Saurus warriors fail to wound, and the Beasts take another 3 wounds in combat resolution, taking them down to their final model. This was tough for us, because I was really hoping we could finish off that unit and reform, so in turn 4, those Cold Ones could go for a charge on the Bloodletters. But Toughness 5 with 4 wounds and regeneration is a great combo. At least they're expensive. On to turn 4, we have the Blue Saurus charge the house again. Both Stegodons charge the Fleshhounds, and the Hounds flee, ending up right in front of the Bloodletters. Although the Stegodons would end up failing the charge range, the Hounds blocked the Bloodletters from being able to charge in the bottom of their turn, so that couldn't have gone better for us, really. The smaller Saurus rally and turn back towards the Plaguebearers, and the Salamanders rally to turn towards the Demonettes. For normal moves, I move the upper Salamanders over so the Temple Guard have room to run, and hopefully they'll get to shoot the Demonettes on turn 5. The Croxagores close in and the lower Skinks move up, then I put the camera up for more of a bird's eye view for the final rounds. Magic ends up 7 versus 3. We try to have the Engine of the Gods damage the nearby enemy units again, and again the range comes up just short. We use 3 dice to cast Speed of Light on Mazdamundi, thinking it might actually help him to do something, and the other battle isn't much of a concern at this point. We get Irresistible Force, the caster takes a wound, and we lose the rest of our dice. We skip shooting and jump into combat, starting with the House Assault. The Flamers cause a single wound, the Scar Veteran and the Old Blood get 4, and the Saurus finish off the Flamers as we realize that the unit can't even move into the building because the frickin' Slan can't fit through the door. In the central combat, the Carnosaur and Rider cause 2 wounds to the Nurgle Beast, then the Cold Ones finish it off. The Cold Ones spin to face the Bloodletters, and the Saurus have to reform to 5 wide so they can do the same. In the lower combat, Mazdamundi's Speed of Light buff allows him to hit and wound the Demon Prince, but it gets saved. The Demon Prince scores 4 wounds back, but all of those get saved. Then the Stegodon manages a wound that gets through, and the whole combat ends up a big draw. On the Demon's turn, the Great Unclean One charges the smaller Saurus, and we elect to flee to hopefully put the Unclean One in the way of the Plague Bearers. They run 12 inches and zoom well out of range of everything, with 3 of the Saurus dying to terrain and the Temple Guard passing their induced panic test. The Unclean One doesn't redirect, but ends up with a failed range of 6 inches, which doesn't matter because they decided not to charge with the Plague Bearers. But they do charge the Salamanders with the Demonettes. In Compulsory, the fleeing Hounds manage a rally thanks to the BSB and spin out of the way of the Bloodletters. For normal moves, lots of things move up, with the Bloodletters losing 7 to the Swamp. Magic ends up 11 versus 7. They start out with 3 dice on Throne of Vines for Kairos, then they go for Flesh to Stone on the Demon Prince, but we use all of our dice to dispel it, since this is the only combat going on right now. He uses 2 dice for Boon of Tzeentch, and gets 4 dice back, and with 3 of those dice, he casts Glean Magic, and chooses to steal the spell Flesh to Stone, so he can cast it on the Demon Prince. Oh well. With their last die, they go for Enchanted Blades of Ibon on the Bloodletters, just to mess with the hypothetical round 5. Shooting is irrelevant, so we move to combat, where the Demonettes take out the Salamanders and overrun 8 inches into the forest, losing 6 to terrain, and in our last combat, Mazdamundi, the Demon Prince, and the Stegodon all fail to wound, so the demons win the combat, but the stubborn Stegodon passes its cold-blooded break test once again. This is where we ended the battle, since it had gone on for several hours and the demands of normal life enclosed around us. The points breakdown here gives the win to the Lizardmen, but with 2 more turns to play, would they manage to keep the lead, or do the demons finally have a favorable unit position? Feel free to let us know what you do in the comments, and like the video if you want to see more of the big battles. Thanks for watching this battle report. Be sure and check back for new videos each week. Do us a favor and subscribe, and feel free to send us a message if you have any tactics or matchups you'd like to see. Till next time from the Vidhammer crew, keep fighting.